Last die. Kill it. If you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be. Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
For this Star Wars fan, I think for a lot of us, like, it doesn't get any better than Star Wars. It just doesn't. I consume so much entertainment, content, right? Movies. And I've been on this weird, like, 90s movie kick as of late, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later in the show. But and look, I like other franchises. I find myself getting into other franchises and, kind of setting Star Wars aside for a little while, and then always sort of find that friend that you always end up coming back to again, right? It's the same thing with my favorite music, my favorite artist, Depeche Mode. The same way. For me, it doesn't get any better than that. I may come across other bands that I end up enjoying and getting into. Really into Churches right now. Love that band. 30 Seconds to Mars. But inevitably, I will come back to Depeche Mode. And like Depeche Mode, like Star Wars, those two things being my favorite of things, they give me the feels more than anything else does. And I think a lot of it plays into that. I don't want to say nostalgia factor, right? Because we can't really talk about nostalgia when it comes to these new movies that we've been enjoying from Disney and Lucasfilm. But I think it does come back to the things that I became the biggest fans of first in my life. I've mentioned before, I was a fan of Star Wars before I was a fan of anything. So many of us were. I mean, Star Wars is the thing that gave us and taught us how to be and what it means to become a fan of something. Depeche Mode, to a lesser extent, being the first band that I ever really, really got into. I'll focus on Star Wars for the remainder of episode number 135 of the My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast. I am your host, Jon Justice. I am glad that you are with the show this week. Not a lot to cover in regards to news. Do have a couple of items when it comes to Jon Favreau and his live action show to debut next year on the Disney streaming service. We'll talk a little bit about that. Talk a little movies, a little bit of Last Jedi, some observations once again that I have, new ones I don't think I've mentioned on the show before. Also watched Rogue One this week, during the week. Want to talk a little bit about that. We will also get into, and the bulk of the show today is going to be listener feedback. I got a lot of feedback from you guys over the course of the past week, and I want to make sure we can spend some time going through that listener feedback. Time permitting, I did find an article, and it relates to another topic that I want to talk about, in referencing the prequels in The Last Jedi. And Brian Young, who's really great on Twitter. If you've never read his Twitter account, he puts up some really great, fantastic fan, puts up some really great threads. He put out an article quite a while ago. 7 times Star Wars: The Last Jedi referenced the prequels, and I'll mention how I kind of landed there. Like I said, there's a specific story that I want to get to in regards to how I ended up landing on that and talking about the prequels. But look, before we do, let's go ahead and get into just a little bit of the news from this week. Not a ton, but we do have a little bit to talk about.
fulfill your destiny.
So there was a couple of articles released, and then there was a post, some insider information from the guys over at Making Star Wars about Jon Favreau and his live-action TV show. We already know from Jon Favreau himself. He's already said that his show is going to take place about 3 years after Return of the Jedi. Beyond that, we don't really know what the subject matter is. We may now. I'll mention that in a moment. What we do know, and what has been reported, sort of officially, non-officially, I mean, I don't think Disney or Lucasfilm was actually going to put out exact budget numbers. This is the kind of stuff that ends up getting reported by secondary outlets. But I believe it was Variety reported that the live-action TV show by Jon Favreau is going to run upwards of $100 million for 10 episodes, or roughly $10 million an episode, which is more than what you get with any other live-action TV show. So, in comparison, I think they did the last season of Game of Thrones for $19 million, I want to say, or the last couple of episodes, over 2 episodes for that. So, all of that is to say they're putting in a bunch of money behind this live-action TV show. The other news that came out, and this was the rumor mill stuff, was that the show itself would focus on Mandalore. And after the fall of the Empire, some turmoil happening on Mandalore, and telling the story of how Mandalore comes into prominence, or what happens to Mandalore after the fall of the Empire. Somebody else had also tweeted out something like, expect some big surprises. I mean, we hear that every single time, right? We always hear the big surprises line, expect big surprises. Was it Todd Fisher made a comment talking about Carrie Fisher, his sister, and the footage that would be used for episode 9, and then made a comment of, this is for the fans, expect big surprises. I don't put much stock in comments like that, because for Star Wars, like, everything's kind of a big surprise, right? I suppose if you have a live-action TV show and let's say Snoke's in it, okay, that's a big surprise, which would be cool. I'd be down with that. If you do a live-action TV show and maybe it ends up showing the Battle of Jakku, because it would take place right around the same time, I think that would be pretty interesting. I'd be down with that. If it ended up filling in some backstory on Rey and her parents, something of that nature, given the timeline, which is possible, I think that would be a big surprise. But look, the reality is, when it's Star Wars, it's all new, it's all exciting, it's all a big surprise. I'm excited about the live-action TV show, not in the same way I am the saga films, or any of the films for that matter. I'm really looking forward to it. Who knows how much I'll end up liking it? It's just not something that I'm sitting back anticipating like I do episode 9. I kind of compartmentalize my fandom, right? And to me, the most important thing, the thing that I gravitate to the most, is the core story. Now, maybe in something like a live-action TV show within that, because I really do love Game of Thrones, maybe I will. Hopefully it's heavily entrenched in some mythology that we fans can go and grab onto, much in the same way we do the mythology of the saga films. But I'm certainly not anticipating the live-action TV show in the same way that I am anticipating Episode 9 and the possibilities that it can bring. I mean, not even close. It is really cool to see, though, however, that they are spending as much money as they are spending on that live-action TV show. That, to me, just means Disney is fully committed to putting forward, and we already knew this, right? But when you see those types of numbers, it really does give you the evidence. Yeah, Disney is fully committed to making sure that we as fans are not disappointed with any of the content that they produce or put out.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, let's talk a little bit about The Last Jedi. And I want to bring the prequel discussion into this here in just a moment. was reading an article recently, and I'll be honest with you, I've got such a short amount of patience for the negativity. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate those of you. I appreciate everybody that writes in and listens to the show. That just goes without saying. But it really means a lot when people point out the positivity of this particular show. I just have so little patience right now for anything negative with this thing that I love so much. That's not to say I'm not going to look at critiques and criticism. It just seems like so much of the negativity surrounding it is just so ridiculous. And it's so self-centered. The people that take, they act like they own this franchise, and that drives me nuts. Anyway, so I was reading this article, and it was talking about how, love never works in Star Wars. And I started it, and then I just was like, I can't even right now just put it off to the side. I've grown to appreciate that the way that Attack of the Clones played out with Anakin and Padme, and certainly going into Revenge of the Sith, I've really grown to appreciate it even more than I did before. The writing is clunky, but and some of the acting may be clunky, but we also know that was very intentional by George Lucas. That's what he planned to do. That's the way that he directed those characters. And over time, and I really like Attack of the Clones. It's weird how that movie suddenly has become the lowest of the totem pole of Star Wars films. To me, it's the most ambitious of the prequels, and the most unique of the prequels. And I think a lot of reason why it's kind of fallen to the bottom of people's list is that love story element in it. And I also do think that's a big reason why there's so much negativity towards The Last Jedi, even though a lot of the individuals that complain about The Last Jedi will never admit that to themselves. I think they go and point to other things. I think really what it comes down to is how uncomfortable they are with the relationship aspect of it. And for me, as you know, being a sort of late to the party Reylo, I love that about the movie. And it makes me, going back to Attack of the Clones, it makes me appreciate Attack of the Clones even more. Especially if these films are indeed going to continue, which they have so far. We only have one more film to find out if that's the case. But how these movies continue with George Lucas and his tradition of poetry and having things rhyme. While there's not a lot of sort of one-to-one comparisons, there is quite a bit of comparisons that can be done on a more sort of meta level when you look at Attack of the Clones, Anakin and Padme, and certainly Ben Solo and Rey, nobody. And again, The Last Jedi has made me appreciate that relationship between Anakin and Padme even more so. And also, kind of going back and remembering as a kid, right? Going back and remembering, and I'm seeing this through the eyes of my son, but going back and remembering what love was like at that age. I mean, look, I'm a goofball 46-year-old hopeless romantic to a point where it annoys my wife as it is right now. Okay. But at the same time, kind of being so far removed from those teenage years, but now being able to see it through my 16-year-old son, and this girl that he's been in a relationship with now for a year, I remember how goofy and stupid I was. And how love can go and make dudes, regardless of age, but certainly at a young age, act like a bunch of just stuttering idiots. So when I go back and watch Attack of the Clones, and again, a movie that I enjoyed, however, knowing that the relationship between Anakin and Padme at the time, I always kind of felt was clunky, I read that as a much better interpretation than the way that I used to interpret it. Even something like the meadow scene. The meadow scene was a forward through for me for the longest time with Attack of the Clones, and it's not anymore. I think it goes a little bit far when Anakin jumps on the back of that big old gigantic flea-looking thing, but even apart from that, it's only a split second. I really do appreciate that scene now, and certainly the fireplace scene. right? That scene in and of itself, I wish I could wish away my feelings, that was a line that used to go and make me cringe, and now I appreciate it for what it is and how, in reality, yeah, Anakin's kind of dumb and googly-eyed over Padme, and why wouldn't he be dressed with her dressed like that? She looked amazing, so yeah, he's going to say something stupid. Because you go and compare that to what goes on with Rey and Kylo Ren and the subtlety of what Rian Johnson did in The Last Jedi between those two characters, being just a little bit older, but also, as I've talked about at length, two individuals who, unless we're told something different, don't have a lot of experience in emotional male-female relationships. And I don't know how much thought Rian Johnson put into that when he made The Last Jedi. But that's certainly how I view it. That Ben Solo and certainly Rey, just by the nature of their upbringing, regardless of how different it was, right? Her being isolated and alone on Jakku, and Ben being identified at an early age and then being sent off to train with Luke, neither of these two individuals have any experience whatsoever when it comes to intimacy with the opposite sex. Which makes that hut scene, and, well, for one, it makes the Force Bond scenes even more important and more meaningful, in my opinion. Because this is kind of the first time that these two individuals, as far as we know, have had any kind of interaction with somebody, even if it is negative. I mean, these two are being put together and forced together in an emotional way, and then feeling emotions that they haven't experienced before, which culminates in that both of these people are searching for answers and for something, and in a moment they end up together in that hut scene. I mean, it really makes it incredibly, and it's masterful the way that Rian Johnson did it, but it makes that finger-touching scene incredibly intimate. I mean, in a way that I've never seen something so simple portrayed on screen in such a way to show that a simple thing like touching fingers could be absolutely so intimate. And you couple with that Luke Skywalker showing up and in a moment breaking up the intimacy of that moment. I mean, it makes that even more. It is an intense version, and even more intense in my opinion, even though Han and Leia were actually in the middle of an embrace and a kiss in the moment. But it really is sort of, you want to compare two scenes, look at Princess Leia and Han Solo on the Millennium Falcon midway through Empire Strikes Back when C-3PO comes and interrupts the two of them. Right, you kind of get Leia walking away going, oh, what did I just do? You get Han going, dude, what are you doing? Upset and then disappointed because Leia's walked away, and the scene's kind of done. What happens in The Last Jedi is incredibly similar, but a lot more meaningful and tragic, and it sets up that next scene that doesn't get nearly enough attention, in my opinion. And that scene in the rain between Rey and Luke, that's a scene, and it wasn't until the last time I watched it, and I don't think I talked about it last week, but it wasn't until the last time that I watched The Last Jedi that it really hit me how much I enjoyed that scene. And it does not get nearly enough credit. Because it really, I think before I sort of mentally capped off the sort of emotional impact of Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, and Rey in the hut, finger-touching. Luke comes and breaks it up, and I kind of mentally broke the scene there in my mind. But the reality is, no, that really is just a portion that leads into and adds to the confrontation between Rey and Luke. And that's an amazing scene. It's suddenly become, and this changes, right? And I've mentioned this before. This changes from viewing to viewing, but it's suddenly become one of those scenes now that I look forward to because it's such a fantastic scene. because Rey ends up being upset, even though they don't like directly imply it. Rey's ticked off because Luke came and broke the mood. She's projecting, or she's outwardly upset because she feels like it was Luke Skywalker's fault that Ben ended up falling to the dark side. But at the same time, now she has her own truth of what she believes Ben can become, and it just makes for that amazing scene. So much so that when you look at the art book for The Last Jedi, and there's a brilliant piece of art showing the Millennium Falcon taking off from the island, and we see the shot in the movie, but the piece of art is amazing. And I always look at those pieces of art and the ones that are really highlighted, and then go back to the movie and look at the movie, knowing that was obviously a pivotal scene for the director, in this case Rian Johnson, because they actually had a piece of art. The Falcon taking off from the planet, leaving Luke behind, is a big moment in the film, right? Rey is now going off on her this part of her hero's journey, and it was so important that they actually made sure they had some concept art to go along with it. So, wow, I kind of whacked out. I had no intention of going there and talking about The Last Jedi as much as I did. All right, one more quick point on The Last Jedi. I want to talk a little bit about the prequels, and then we'll get into, want to make sure we have enough time to get through all the listener feedback this week. But another observation on The Last Jedi, and if I have mentioned this before, then I apologize. I don't think that I've gotten into it. But The Last Jedi really is like a classic movie. And I don't mean classic in the sense as, well, I do. It is a classic movie in the sense that I believe it's going to be one of the most cherished and looked back upon as one of the best Star Wars movies ever made. But it also feels very much like you're watching a film that and a story that did take place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. The original trilogy did that, but really it was just A New Hope, in my opinion. And A New Hope, in my opinion, feels like it was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, simply because it was shot back in the late 70s, and the technology was such where it already has an aesthetic about it that seems like it's a period piece. You don't get that quite as much, in my opinion, with The Empire Strikes Back. Certainly not in Return of the Jedi, just by nature of locations. You go to the forest planet, there's nothing really nostalgic about being on the forest planet. You know, the Death Star, that's technology, okay? Tatooine, we've been there before, and then we're on the ships, right? You certainly don't get that in the prequel films, especially since we're looking at the galaxy through a lens of prosperity going into despair. So everything looks a lot newer as it is. So you don't really have the nostalgia factor there. The Last Jedi, by virtue of the way it was shot, and I've mentioned that warmth that covers the film, but because of the locales, right? The casino, to me, on Canto Bight, while it's the most prequel-looking thing, the way that it's filmed and the way that it was designed and the characters there, to me, does very much feel nostalgic. That could be any era ever, by nature of the outfits, the clothes, and the designs of the buildings. And, of course, the other set pieces are, Crate, on the planets or inside of the Supremacy or other ships. And so the way that Rian Johnson shot it, and that's really what I'm driving at here, the way that Rian Johnson shot that movie and the way that it looks and the themes that are there and all the moments on Octo, to me, really do take this movie and set it apart, where you do feel like you're watching something that did take place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And that's, to me, the artistic part of The Last Jedi, and why that movie is so special, and why I struggle so much on weekends to not watch it. So, I mentioned earlier that I've been on this sort of 90s kick of watching 90s movies as of late, and I don't know why. Like last week, I ended up throwing on a Deep Impact. I remember how much I enjoyed that movie, and I can't even really put my finger on why I enjoyed that movie. I think I just happened to really like the different human stories in that particular film, because it's not the greatest film in the world. It's just a disaster movie. I've talked a lot about this project that I'm working on, And thanks to everybody who sent in emails. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But I've been really interested in storytelling as of late, how movies are formatted, how storylines play out, the heroes' journeys. I've just really been into it. I mean, I always am, but I've really been paying close attention. And for some reason, I've gravitated towards these 90s movies. Ended up watching with Bridget Fonda, Point of No Return. I remember back from '93. Really liking that movie. Enjoyed watching it last night, although the music in it is so early 90s, it's not even funny. But when I head into the weekends, like tonight, I don't know. Usually I'll watch a movie with my boys or with my wife Melinda, and then they'll head off and do something else, and usually I'll end up watching another movie. Usually Friday and Saturday nights, I sit down with a bottle of wine, and I do a double feature both nights. And, it's tough for me to, no, I don't want to go back and watch The Last Jedi. Because I really want. I probably will end up watching The Last Jedi tonight, simply because I did the podcast and I'm really, really in the mood now. Why do I bring all this up? I bring all this up for this particular reason. My son Logan, 16 years old. He's watched all these films before, but neither of my boys have really gotten into Star Wars the way that I have. Maybe they will. Kyle, my 11-year-old, is a much bigger fan of Harry Potter in terms of a franchise. And Logan's in that 16-year-old age, so he's kind of shifting away from the movie stuff. He'll probably come back to it as he gets older, like all of us do. But he's been watching. This is the cool part. He's been watching all the movies with his Doing Nothing with My Fingers girlfriend, who's never watched any Star Wars movies. So over the course of the past few months, he's been watching the movies with her, and they've gone through the original trilogy now, and now they're on to the prequel trilogy, and then he'll go and watch the newer films. And it's just fun to sit back and watch and hear his comments and her comments about these movies, and to slowly see, because I think she's going to end up becoming a really big fan of these films. I don't think he's realized what he's done here, but from what he describes to me and what she said to me, these movies are speaking to her, and she's really enjoying them a lot, and she's becoming a fan. It's just, to me, it's so neat. I don't know how else to put it, right? It's so neat to see these new fans emerge through these different ways. I mean, I passed it down. The boys know, obviously, if they look into my office, you can't hide it. If you just stare at me, because I'm usually wearing a Star Wars shirt, they know what a big fan I am, and they're sharing it with their friends, and they're becoming fans. And it is such a tribute to what George Lucas has created. I just wanted to share that with you. That was my only point on it. I don't think we're going to have time to get to this prequel article, but I just wanted to share it in light of talking about Attack of the Clones earlier, and want to encourage you that if you have your own stories to tell along the same lines, please always drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube. I'd love to hear if you have similar stories of new fans and people that have been exposed to the films for the first time, and what you've witnessed.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
All right, I just wanted to take a moment and remind you that if you have not sent me an email to be on the mailing list for the upcoming project, you can do so by writing into talkshownerd@gmail.com. talkshownerd@gmail.com. I've mentioned many times on the show that I have a project that I've been working on for the past couple of years. I'm down to the last few months of finishing up the project, and anticipate that I will be able to share it with you and with the world by the end of the year. Really excited. If you're a fan of Star Wars, if you're a fan of my nerd world, if you like what I do on any level, I do really believe that you are going to enjoy this project that I've been working so hard on. And the mailing list is the way that you can be one of the first to know what it is and how to get your hands, eyes, ears, whatever on it. So drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. I will add you to the mailing list. And again, thank you to everybody who has already signed up for the list. It's been growing daily, and I can't tell you how excited I am and how much I appreciate your interest in this all original content that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you.
My nerd world.
All right, let's dive into some listener feedback this week. Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and on YouTube, you can also find me on Twitter at @MyNerdWorld and at Jon Justice, Jon Justice. So, first one comes from SJ's, and this goes back to episode number 128, The Essence of Star Wars. What JJ pulled off in 7, in a lot of ways, is so underrated when you think about all the things that he had to do, how he had to structure the story. For instance, what a stroke of genius it was to use Luke as the MacGuffin, because it kept him as the center point. However, the problem and the reason he couldn't finish the script was because every time he brought Luke in, it immediately brought the story to a grinding halt, because it unleashed a never-ending questions and exposition, and immediately took the spotlight off the new characters and squarely on Luke. And JJ's answer to that is just one of his strokes of genius when you consider how much he had to do for a story that takes place, 30 years later than the previous one, that still has the old cast in it while giving them their due justice, but introducing new leads and making us invest in them just as much, if not more, because if it weren't, it would not have worked. He smartly decided not to delve into the 30 years leading up to 7 really much at all, and just dropped us in this moment. And we learned things as we went along with the characters, did at appropriate moments, and it was such a blessing for the pacing of that movie. GD, that movie is so finely crafted, it's hard to imagine he and Larry pulled that off so well. It's really, those comments, thank you so much for the comments, are really interesting because I agree, but I often don't think of it that way. You're absolutely right in your assessment. But it's so finely crafted that the movie plays out rather simply. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but much like the original Star Wars, which is a fairly straightforward, simple story to follow, so is The Force Awakens. But what JJ had to do to make that happen, you're absolutely right. And look at what, and the proof of your comments about Luke Skywalker are quickly found in The Last Jedi and the response to The Last Jedi. Because people had such high expectations on Luke Skywalker. And I think that's the other, there's a lot of reasons, which I'm not going to get into, why people have a hard time with The Last Jedi. But I think another one of the big ones is that Luke Skywalker was such an important character for so many people, you were never going to make everybody happy with what you did with him. And because of that, Rian Johnson did what he felt was the best thing to do. I also feel that it was the best thing to do. But in doing that, you're going to end up, and he did, ticking off a bunch of people who wanted to see Luke be something different. They wanted him to match what he was supposed to match in their mind. And if J.J. Abrams had brought in Luke Skywalker in The Force Awakens, because I had always expected that it would be Luke to show up at the very end. He would be the one to pull, using the Force, the lightsaber out of the snow, grab it, and take on Kylo Ren, right? That was always what I thought was going to happen. I think that JJ, in that moment, not in keeping Luke hidden, was an incredibly brave choice and move, and it absolutely paid off. But my point is, had JJ not done that, and had he introduced Luke Skywalker, the writers, SJ's is absolutely right. Your focus would have been completely on Luke Skywalker. And on top of that, you would have ended up ticking off a lot of people because, again, regardless of what happened and how Luke Skywalker was handled, it wasn't going to match at least a quarter of the headcanon of so many people that cherish that character so much. So you're absolutely right. In putting Luke Skywalker in the story takes the focus off of it. Rian Johnson was great. He put the focus on Luke Skywalker, handled it in the way that I thought was a masterstroke. But in doing so, because you brought Luke Skywalker back, you're going to end up alienating that audience that just simply demanded in their mind that character go a different way. All right, Alex Shepers writes this. My ending to Episode 9. Maz Kanata weds Reylo on a cliff on Ahch-To, where Luke passed away. Maz stands on the meditation rock for height purposes. Ben's hair is cut just like Han's, and Rey wears Leia's dress from the medal ceremony at the end of Episode 4. Finn hands them back the black obsidian Mustafar rings. They both kiss, and an entire crowd full of every supporting and ground level at ground level cheer and happiness. Maz and Finn walk off the screen, leaving Reylo staring at the twin sons of Ahch-To. Yeah, okay, I'd be down with that. I'd be down with that. I do have a bit of a twist before we get to our next comment, and thank you for writing in. I do have a bit of a twist on what I thought about from last week's show when I mentioned the footage they didn't use for Carrie Fisher, and you had Maz Kanata handing the legacy saber over to Carrie Fisher, and we saw that shot in the trailer, and maybe that's what they end up using. What if it ends up that they manipulate that shot so it's actually Rey handing the lightsaber over to Princess Leia at the end of the film? And what if Princess Leia is the only one that knows that Ben and Rey are leaving to go off together because the balance has been achieved, and she's the only one that knows where they actually go? Again, this is not headcanon, this is just a suggestion. I was thinking about it on a bike ride the other day. How cool would that be if they manipulated that shot where it wasn't Maz Kanata handing the lightsaber over, it was actually Rey laying down her arms, knowing they found balance in the Force, and the whole story's come full circle along with Ben's redemption. All right, let's get to the next comment from the blindfolded bird watcher, talking about last week's episode. How Episode 9 ends, episode number 134. Look at the making of Return of the Jedi by J.W. Rinsler. If you own the book, it's expensive to buy, but it explains the rough drafts of the film and a suitable amount of detail without one personally browsing through the archives at Lucasfilm headquarters. As for your fears about Luke being brought back, I don't really see it as an issue, since one of the first drafts of Return of the Jedi had Anakin coming back. I mentioned that, to back alive with Obi-Wan and Yoda. Granted, The Last Jedi probably exhibit more impact if Luke remained alive, but there are always ways in which the plot can bring back characters in an emotional, satisfying manner. This is the thing too. Whatever they do end up doing with Episode 9 with Luke, I just trust their judgment that they're going to handle it the right way. Right? Regardless of that. When we talk about our suggestions or our ideas or how we think it's going to end, for me, it's just ideas and suggestions. I'm always willing to accept whatever the filmmakers end up deciding it is that they want to end up doing. And again, I trust their judgment. All right, let's get to some more comments, and we'll talk to Misconduct 1. I don't know how this will end, but I'm excited to find out. That is the biggest joy I find in waiting for a Star Wars movie, knowing that it's going to be deep and meaningful and gives me goosebumps. I'm hoping for a happy ending, although this is Star Wars, and knowing there are always morals to mythological storytelling, there's always, in the back of my mind, the reality that the wars never end happy and no one ever truly wins. I don't know, John, what do you think? Help put my mind at ease. I'm hoping for a happy ending. I think that we are going to get a happy ending. I think that happy ending is going to be largely dependent on what your views are about what constitutes a happy ending. But I think we'll get a happy ending that's going to be pretty much on par with the way Return of the Jedi was. There was always a question of Return of the Jedi of, there's still Empire out there, what are they going to do? But we just kind of all put it out of our minds because we got the second Death Star destroyed and Darth Vader was redeemed, even though Anakin Skywalker ended up dying, but we do see the Force Ghosts at the end. So my expectation is that, the main threat is going to be eliminated. You'll have, most likely, a redemption of Ben Solo, may or may not result in his passing. Probably we'll see the Force Ghosts of the main characters that have died and have the ability to project themselves as Force ghosts, and will be left with an understanding that the galaxy is now at peace. I also think that at some point in the future, we will see a return of the galaxy in turmoil when they continue the saga films with a brand new set of characters. I don't think that storyline's going to end. I absolutely expect that sometime down the line, we'll get an episode 10. All right. Allie writes in, I absolutely love my nerd world. Oh, thank you. I don't have anyone in my life who enjoys Star Wars in the same way that I do, right? AKA is extremely obsessed with it, buys all the books, likes to collect the merchandise, thinks about Star Wars all the time, and likes to analyze every detail of everything, haha. So I turned to podcasts, Reddit, and Tumblr to help fuel my fandom and connect with like-minded people. I found your show a couple of months ago before The Last Jedi came out, and I'm so thankful that I did. Your happy spirit, positivity, and love for Star Wars always brings me joy. This is what happens when I don't pre-read an email. Actually, I did. I responded, but I forgot what was in here, and I remember telling myself that this was a really incredibly nice email, and that if I read it on the show, it's going to sound like I'm patting myself on the back. I'm not. Allie, I really do appreciate your comments. They mean the world to me. I recommend your show along with my other faves, What the Force and Sky Talkers, to anyone who will listen. All that is to say, I'd like to be added to the mailing list. I'm looking forward to what's to come. Thank you so much, Allie. Those are incredibly kind words, and that really does make my day. All right, friend of the show, Tim, writes this. Tim Casey. Brother John, love the podcast, always have. I've deepened my Star Wars fandom from regular sci-fi geek to an official nerddom, largely because of your enthusiasm for it. I listen to your regular radio program every day and love how you do there and here. Here's my comment. With episode 9, do you think the fandom will finally come together? I mean, with 7, the complaint was it's too formulaic. It's just a rehash. Then with 8, which I adore, the haters criticized the changes Ryan took, and I just want all the fans to come together and embrace the awesome. Sign me up for the new project. I can't wait to see what it is that you bring. All right. So will episode 9 unite the fandom? I think that it will. And I think that it will, regardless of how well the film is received. And let me explain. I like to think that you have different levels. I like to think. That's not the right word. I know. You have different levels of fandom, right? And within those levels of fandom, you have different levels of negativity. We won't talk the positive. Let's just talk about the negativity. We're talking about a divided fandom. I'd like to think that you writing and me doing the show represent the positive side of the fandom, the people that like what Rian Johnson did, if we're focused on that specifically. So let's just talk about those that sort of gravitate towards the negative aspect and have frustrations with The Last Jedi. I think you have a lot of people that already were upset with Disney buying Star Wars. It was never going to be anything that they wanted it to be. They're the majority of the people that complained that The Force Awakens was a rehash. I don't think you're ever going to be able to make them happy. And then you got those people that are out there just making a buck off of trashing The Last Jedi because it gets them a lot of likes, it gets them a lot of page views, and it gets them a lot of YouTube hits. And that, in turn, ends up helping to pay to create the content that they make. Then you have those that just simply didn't like The Last Jedi for whatever reason, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. So, why do I think Episode 9 has the power to bring everybody back in? Because I think that what's going to end up happening, you're going to have people that aren't going to be happy regardless, but I think a lot of people are going to respond positively to Episode 9, regardless of the content, just so they can justify their not liking The Last Jedi. Meaning comments like, see, J.J. Abrams should have done 8 because this is how you make a Star Wars movie. I think people are going to automatically do that regardless of, J.J. Abrams could go all in, right? All in on Reylo in Episode 9. I mean, just whatever your version of Reylo is, just fully commit to that. And you're still going to have people, even if J.J. Abrams goes further with Reylo than even what Rian Johnson did, you'll have people go, yeah, see, that's how you should have handled it. That's how much I didn't like The Last Jedi. I think The Last Jedi is going to stand, by itself being controversial, and it'll just stay that way. And I think over time, because of people like me and a lot of you who really love that film and hold it to in such high regard, I think that it will end up being one of the most poignant and best Star Wars films ever. And I think that negativity towards it is always going to be. So yeah, I do think that Episode 9 will, regardless. I also think this is the world that we live in, and The Last Jedi won't be the last controversial Star Wars movie. Certainly not when the new Rian Johnson trilogy ends up coming out, because I just think there's a group of people out there that are never going to accept what Rian Johnson has done with the franchise, and will always just end up casting it sort of in a negative light, sort of regardless. So, all right, let's get back to the emails and comments. This comes from Lauren. Hey there, John. First of all, wanted to tell you how much I love the show. It is usually my lunch break go-to, and I really enjoy hearing the latest Star Wars news and your thoughts. Listening to the show this week, and I totally had a major fangirl moment with you. Hey now. My dream ending for 9 would definitely be to see Ben and Rey together on Tatooine. Tatooine is where everything started for Star Wars. It is where Anakin was a child, where his turn to the dark side began, where Anakin met Obi-Wan and Padme, the planet where Luke, Obi-Wan, and Han and Chewie all met in the original trilogy. It is also where the original trio reunited in Return of the Jedi to save Han from Jabba and the Carbonite. Right? By the way, I agree that Return of the Jedi has to be my least favorite Star Wars movie, if there can actually be a least favorite, right? Okay, right, exactly. I think we agree. I love Return of the Jedi, but I'm done ranking them. But it is down low on my list. Tatooine is such an important place for Star Wars and the Skywalker family. Every member of the family has been there or lived there, and how fitting would it be of Ben to end there? I've written a fan fiction or fan fictions ending like this, and just find it so poetic. George Lucas even said Star Wars is like poetry. It rhymes. What rhymes more than the Last Skywalker ending on the family homestead where the entire saga began? My dream shot would mirror Revenge of the Sith, where Beru and Owen hold a young Luke and look out over the sand dunes and the twin suns, and I instead want to see Ben and Rey holding their infant children and looking out on the horizon like those who came before, and the difference being, as you said, peace reigns in the galaxy, cue epic Star Wars soundtrack. I know this might be a pipe dream, but hey, a girl can dream. Forget going back to Jakku. Why would you want to go back to Jakku? Let's instead have a film that ends like poetry after it all rhymes. Thanks again for your show. Look forward to hearing more as we wait for 9. May the Force be with you, and may the Force be with you as well. I am one with the Force. All right. No, I think that's great. I actually, boy, you want to go all in on that. I actually just got a thought. I mean, how cool would it be, one of the final shots of the film where we return to Tatooine, but we get there with an overhead ship shot, the way that A New Hope opened, right? Or maybe we do it in reverse. I mean, how great would that be? If there was some way we could duplicate that iconic shot from the beginning of A New Hope, right? And I suppose if you're going to go full circle and we're going to dive that deep into it, the other way to look at it as well, if you're going to do that, you need to go all the way back to The Phantom Menace, which is also, by the way, just a quick side note, let's just entertain this idea. If we're talking about tying all the films together, and maybe this is an interesting one for you to respond to. So we're about ready to close the show out this week, but I just wanted to throw this out. What if we end up closing the trilogy out, instead of Ben and Rey? Let's just assume for a second they're together, okay, and they have to go off together. I like that idea, and I do think there's a high probability that's going to happen, right? That the way we find peace in the galaxy again is the balance, and that balance is Reylo. It's Ben and Rey coming together, but they would have to go off by themselves because of the crimes that Kylo Ren committed under the influence of Snoke. Okay. What if we ended on Naboo? What if we ended on them going back to the home planet of Padme, right? Kind of, what if we went that route? I mean, I like that idea quite a bit. It still fits. It's far enough in the timeline where if they need to go off to be by themselves, very few people within the galaxy right now would even think, I'm trying to think, who would think to go look on Naboo? What if they went back to Naboo and the Nayberries, home, and that's where they ended up, capping the film off. I mean, look, you want to go that route. I mean, have them, if they end up fully coming together, right? JJ goes all in with Reylo, and those two end up getting married at the end of episode 9. I mean, how incredible would it be if it was in the same spot that Anakin and Padme got married in? Which one? So there you go. There's your question for the week. Which one would you rather see? Would you rather have 9 wrap up? Let's just assume Ben and Rey are together. Would you rather have it wrap up with them together on Tatooine, Lars Homestead, or would you rather have them end up together on Naboo? I'm gonna have to spend the week thinking about that one. That's juicy. Thank you so much for checking the show out this week. Again, if you have not signed up for the mailing list yet, you can email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. That is the email go-to for everything if you want to talk about the show. But specifically with this, I keep calling it, I know, I'll let you guys all know what it is. I've got my reasons, and I'll explain. I do have my reasons for being sort of secretive about it, and once I'm able to present my project to the world, I'll explain the reason why I've been so secretive. But if you want to get on the mailing list to be one of the first to find out what it is, and to be able to, again, get your hands, eyes, or ears on it, again, keeping it secretive, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find the show, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, YouTube. Drop me a rating, please, if you don't mind, especially if you use iTunes. It'd be kind of fun to see the podcast go up a bit in the ratings, which is almost impossible because it seems like there's a new podcast like every single week, and so many of them are good. Oh, they're so much fun. I love listening to the new podcast. So, let's see. Any other business to take care of? No, I think I've given out the email enough. I think I've talked Star Wars enough for this week. I hope you guys all have a fantastic week, and I think, I'm going to go watch The Last Jedi tonight. I'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks again. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.